Yo, boys and girls, it's your boy Mark Gray inside the gray area, somewhere between black and white. There's always that shade of gray, and I'm pleased, honored, and privileged to be joined right now by somebody who has a little bit more gray than me. He is the incomparable Dr. Wilmer Leon. He is a noted national radio talk show host and author, and you know how most people have their religious leader, the person who they go to for religious countenance. Well, Dr. Leon is my political countenance, and he joins us right now from Sirius XM satellite radio in his palatial home studio office. Doc, always a pleasure to talk to you, my friend. How are you?
Mark, I'm doing great. Greetings to you and your audience, and I'm always humbled when you call and because you value my opinion, and I appreciate that.
Well, you know, I've always valued your opinion, and back in the dark ages when this satellite radio thing was coming up, you were one of the people that we worked with over at the Power, and we were doing the work of the Lord, if you will, then, and we were talking about these same issues. We were talking about the pandemic, if you will, of crimes against African American men primarily at that time from police officers. Now that's bled over into the women. So my question to you is right now, at this seminal moment in American history, what do we believe right now is going to mark a significant change? Or is this one of those moments, in your opinion, we'll look back on down the line and say, it was great hype for a good week?
You know, a lot of times it's hard to judge the moment when you're in the midst of the moment. And so that's a real hard question to answer. We've been through this before. We went through this with Emmett Till in 1955. We went through this with Rodney King. We've been here before, but I do see a difference in the international aspects and implications here, because not only are people across this country protesting, and it's very interesting to me to see the ethnic dynamics involved. There are a lot of white folks that are walking down the streets in their cities and protesting alongside African Americans. And in many shots, you see more white folks than black people. I think there was a protest in Philly last week. Huge protest, mostly white folks. I got a call yesterday. I did a show for Al Arabiya TV out of London, and they wanted my analysis on why there are so many protests in London, in France, in Brazil. I said, well, first of all, every country you mentioned is a former colonial power. So I said, you can't disassociate colonialism from racial oppression. And the European countries that were mentioned were colonial powers, and the United States is a neo-colonial power. So on the wane, but a neo-colonial power. So let me all of that to get to this point. I feel a difference in this one. The question is really going to be sustainability. Congress has just announced its legislation, the 2020 Justice Initiative legislation, where they've got a number of things on the plate. It's got to go from the House to the Senate, and we'll see what Mitch McConnell does with it when it gets to the Senate. We are looking right now at the November 3rd election. So there are a number of pieces at play here. It's politically to the advantage, or it's politically advantageous to the Democrats to take a lead on this, but how far are they willing to push it? So it's hard to call, but right now I am feeling there's a much more serious mood here than there has been in previous events.
For about 5 decades now, you've been watching this civil rights movement. You've seen protest upon protest, and you've seen demonstration upon demonstration. Give me a sense from your perspective as a political scientist, what makes these different demonstrations different? Aside from the fact that there seems to be unity around the world for the senseless death of George Floyd, there seems to be a totally different tone. I mean, you ask Asians, you ask, those who've migrated to the United States, if their perception of what they heard about Black people and Black males in particular was wrong, and now they seem to be able to identify with it.
Well, a couple of things. One is video. That 8.5 minutes of Chauvin with his knee on Mr. Floyd's neck, about 3 minutes of it, the last 3 minutes of it, he's already done. I mean, he's just laid out. And Chauvin shows no willingness, interest, or concern about resistance. So to your question, one of the things that I said on the Al Arabiya piece was that brutality is, and the understanding of inhumane treatment and brutality is an internationally recognized phenomenon. So that video, whether it plays in Minnesota, whether it plays in Montana, or whether it plays in the Maldives, it's the same thing. It's you watch a man murdered on your screen. And that resonates no matter your ethnicity, no matter your religious affiliation, whether you went to Hampton or Howard, it doesn't matter. It is what it is. So there's a resonance there that doesn't require interpretation. So the video aspects of this, and along with Ahmaud Arbery in Georgia, the video is so telling. That's one thing. One of the problems I see here, and this is why I can't give you a more definitive answer on where it's going to go, is because I'm still waiting for the agenda. In the 60s, we had the Civil Rights Act. We had the voting. There was legislation that was being championed. What a lot of people don't realize is that the civil rights movement had a three-pronged approach that was operating in parallel. There was the movement in the streets, there was the movement in the legislature, and there was the movement in the courts. And all three were operating at the same time. Here, we don't really seem to have that. So people are reacting to the horrific video of Mr. Floyd being lynched, but I'm waiting for the agenda. When I hear the protesters on the mic and they're speaking, they're talking about police brutality. Okay, got that. But what does that mean?
Well, let me jump in here with that, because I spent a lot of time at Black Lives Matter Plaza over the last couple of days. And I talked to people, and among the things, to your point about agenda, the defund the police seems to be an agenda item.
That is now surfacing, yes.
Yeah, there also seems to be an agenda as it relates to law enforcement reforms, certainly relative to the chokehold and the amount. I even had a conversation, or was on a conference with the Prince George's County executive in Maryland, Angela also Brooks, where she talked about looking at what's known as a policeman's Bill of Rights and sort of reining back in on some of those unfettered liberties that they have with regards to force. I've even heard with the pandemic, healthcare as possible agenda items. And I hate referring back to Jay-Z with the NFL because he's blatantly let me down. However, when you start moving from, policy and protest to actionable items, these seem to be actionable items. How do we go about lighting the match, if you will, on these actionable items?
Well, here's the problem. All of that is good. All of that is valid. But when you start talking about defunding the police, which if you're talking about the militarization of the police, I got that. That makes perfect sense. But if you start talking about banning the chokehold, got that. But this isn't the first time we've had that conversation. These are symptoms of a much bigger problem. And what I have been writing about and been saying for a very long time is, until we get to the point where people can sit and honestly say, this isn't new, this is America. This is America as it has always been. Reverend Sharpton said at the service in Minnesota, he said, this is evidence of a failed machine. No, the machine didn't fail. The machine has been functioning as the machine was designed to function since we arrived on these shores in 1619. This is not, and I say that, and when I say that, I go through the documents of this country. The Virginia slave codes of 1680 that said that a slave master could not be convicted of murder for killing an enslaved individual because no one in their right mind would destroy their own property. That's where I found the first place written where we had become a thing. You look at the Constitution, you look at the 3/5 Compromise, you look at the fugitive slave provision, which is where so many of these police forces actually stemmed from. Slave patrols. That's written in the Constitution of this country. That's the founding document of the country. You look at Plessy v. Ferguson. There are so many places where it's written into the documentation of this country that we are less than human. And so what I am saying is, we aren't fighting for civil rights. We haven't been fighting for civil rights, and we haven't been fighting for human rights. We've been fighting to be recognized as human beings. And until that conversation is held, to me, everything else is kind of icing.
Is that
if that makes sense?
Yeah, well, let me ask you this then. Is that a constitutional conversation, or is that more of a Supreme Court situation?
It's all the above. It's all the above because it's the Virginia slave codes, that was colonial documentation. That was Virginia before it was a state. Plessy v. Ferguson, that's Supreme Court. The 3/5 Compromise, the Fugitive Slave Clause, well, of course, we know those things have already been written out of the Constitution. But you have to look at the mindset, look at the protests that are still supporting the Robert E. Lee statue. See, so we're talking about a mindset that has been prevalent and controlling in this country before the country was even founded. So until we start there, yes, America is a racist country and was founded as such. Until you hear Mitch McConnell and all them others say that, you're not dealing with the crux of the problem.
So is the crux of the problem then vote en masse, vote to not
That's
only Okay, because again, back to effective policy. When I look at this whole notion of, I guess, rebranding law enforcement, and when America starts, it only makes its way around the world. If these issues are ingrained in the constitutional fabric of the nation, then who's the next Thurgood Marshall? Who's the guy that can stand before a court that's as conservative right now as it was when he argued for the right to vote? And they've been fueled by a power struggle for equality. They don't have the people behind their back anymore, but they do have a majority of conservatism right now that certainly does lead one to believe that there could be some insensitivity to change. Can't be any more insensitive than the court that, Thurgood argued before. But is there another skilled litigator out there who can construct a compelling argument that may move Justice John Robertson and friends in a direction of somewhat capitulation to the people, so to speak?
There are jurists out there. There are attorneys out there. Don't ask me to give you a list. But they're out there. Part of the thing you gotta look at, though, we had the first African American president. Did he nominate an African American to the court? Did he nominate an African American woman to the court? No. He gave us Elena Kagan, he gave us Sonia Sotomayor, and he then also nominated
Merrick Garland.
3 shots at an African American, 3 shots at an African American woman, no shots were taken. So that shows you a prevailing mindset. You mentioned Roberts. Go back to Earl Warren. Earl Warren was nominated by Dwight Eisenhower. And Earl Warren was nominated. He was a former Republican governor of California. And Eisenhower nominated Earl Warren because he expected Earl Warren to toe the conservative line and not vote in support of Brown in the Brown case. Earl Warren Eisenhower brought Warren to the White House for dinner and told him, look, you got to understand the mindset of these people in the South. They don't want their kids. They're not bad people. Sound familiar? They don't want their kids, they don't want their precious little girls sitting in a classroom next to a big black brute. The Brown case was on its way to go the other way until Earl Warren came in and convinced the other justices that they needed to vote in favor of integrating schools. So I just use that as an example to show you how a lot of times the person that you're looking for may come your way and you not even realize that the person is coming. Nobody expected Earl Warren to be that way. And he wound up being, the Warren court wound up being the most liberal court in the history of this country. And the subsequent justices, Rehnquist, Roberts, Thomas. No. I'm talking about the Supreme, the head of the court, the chief justices, have all been working to undermine so many of the positive steps that were passed by the Warren court. So they come from, I guess my point is, they come from the strangest of places. And in many instances, they come when you least expect them to be there. That's how we got the Miranda rights. The Miranda decision came out of the Warren court. What was called the fruit of the poisonous tree doctrine, which made it illegal for the police to use evidence that they got from bad warrants. That came from the so many things came from there that nobody ever expected that Earl Warren would give us. So again, some of those things come from some of the craziest places that you don't expect them. But again, instead of Merrick Garland, Barack Obama should have given us an African-American woman. That would have made more sense politically, because he then could have rallied black women against Senator McConnell. Why are you opposing not only an African-American, but why are you opposing an African-American woman? Man, that would have resonated across so many circles. But again, they gave us Merrick Garland, and we got what we got.
That's Dr. Wilmer Leon, folks. You can check him out, Sirius XM and Sputnik Radio, all over the place in the satellite universe. Hopefully he doesn't have a brush, or his satellite doesn't have a brush with the most recently rocketed launch from down in Cape Kennedy, because we definitely need your perspective. Quickly before I let you go,
Yes.
Sociologically speaking, I saw a lot of Black American women, well, women of color generally speaking, but with the chasm that seems to be dividing between Black men and white men who were born in America as far as relationships stand for, I never thought that I would see such a, we stand for you, protect our Black men type of vibe here. Do you think this is a unifying moment for that particular community individually? Or again, are we caught up in the moment of euphoria, and then possibly before election time, when we really need those bonds to be there at the ballot box, it will dissipate? How do you think that whole family scenario plays in to this coming election?
I think it's all the above. I think it's everything that you just mentioned. I'm in communication with very dear friends of mine who are white, that are telling me that they're having conversations with their relatives in Virginia and other places. Their relatives don't understand, why are Black people so angry? Why does the Lee statue have to come down? And some of my friends are trying to educate some of their relatives on, this is 2020 and you're still back in the 40s. What are you doing? It's there are a number. This is a multivariant equation. There are a lot of factors that contribute into this. The economy is playing a huge role here. You've got what, 4 million people that applied for unemployment last month, most of whom are white people. So they're looking at their realities being stressed, and they're having to adjust their realities. As the economy comes back, as life starts to move closer to the normal that they knew before January when COVID-19 hit, will they then revert back to business as usual? Many of them probably will. Will what we are experiencing right now resonate enough for it to be a lasting element of change in the minds of many people? I'm sure it will be. And the question is, how committed are we going to be to adhering and seeing to it that the change is permanent? How, today you saw Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer, and they all got their kente shawls on, and that, hey, Chuck, that's beautiful, but are you going to wear that tomorrow? And are you going to take it back to New York, where they've been the ones that have been initiating these attacks on Black men, quite frankly? Exactly. And hence, what was the woman in New York that I got a thing right here, Amy Cooper, right? Who tried to weaponize Christian Cooper's African ancestry because she knew she could do it. She knew she could do it. Her sense of white privilege let her know that she could call in the American Defense Forces, as with in the movie Birth of a Nation, to protect the sanctity of white womanhood. She thought she could play that again and found out that she couldn't. So we're going to see a final point. A lot of people are focused on November 3rd, as they should be. You should vote. But the question is, where are you going to be on November 4th? And what are you going to be fighting for on November 7th? and what are you going to be holding them accountable for November 3rd, 2023? That to me is the question.
And as it relates to nonviolent, civil disobedient, public discourse, to me, that seems like it's a perfect opportunity to move away from the narratives that are created by titles. We look at protests versus demonstrations. We look at young black men with hoodies on and they're thugs. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people look at the National Guard, many of whom I've talked to off the record that didn't want to have to do what they're being paid to do. They were out there and they really took a lot of unfair scrutiny from a lot of frustrated young people who look like us. And I got both sides of the story, but I thought that they were remarkably restrained in the nation's capital. But talk about the connotations and the narratives that are formed by these pejorative terms. You know, thug, young black man, protester versus demonstrator. I mean, how's that played into to reality over the past, half century or so?
Well, the narrative, and I'm glad you used that word because I use that word quite often myself. The narrative is key. The language is important. Are these riots or are these uprisings? Because the narrative is what is used not only to form the description and communicate an understanding of events, but the narrative is what is used in order to ensure that a particular response or a desired response is generated. And that's why it's so important for shows like yours to get out here and to be out here, allowing us to explain our perspective on reality. And nobody, and because a big part of the problem is you have a lot of folks who aren't from our community trying to describe the actions of the community. And God bless them. Many of them are trying to do this and are trying to do this as honestly and effectively as they possibly can. But it's hard for you to discuss it if you haven't lived it. And so there aren't enough of us writing about it, Skyping about it, Zooming about it, having programs. And there are too many of us that are afraid when we have the opportunity to go on these national programs. There are too many of us that are afraid to speak the truth because their contracts are involved, their paychecks may get hit, and hey, this is too serious not to speak the truth. And let me just quickly say that, because I'm thinking about this in terms of Reverend Sharpton's comment about the broken machine. That's not an indictment of Reverend Sharpton. I understood what he was saying, and God bless him for saying it. I just found that language, that narrative, not to be as accurate as clearly articulating that, again, the machine isn't broken. The machine is operating as it was designed to operate. That to me shows you a difference in narrative.
Interesting. We got a lot of work to do. This is going to be the final question, though, because it went off in my mind. A lot of people have been saying we need white people to stand with us. I saw a lot of people, and I don't know if it was, again, caught up in this civil rights euphoria, who were calling themselves out for their white privilege. That seems to be I don't want to say it's a fashionable narrative, Doc, but there were a lot of people out there with Black Lives Matter t-shirts. I'd never seen anything like that before. It was amazing, and it was almost heartwarming. How genuine is it? Is this coming to identify the fact that you've been operating with white privilege, a sense of guilt, or is it a sense of societal evolution as it relates to the rank and file, those of us regular folks, understanding that there's truly a need for injustice reform, shall we call it?
Oh, I think it runs the gamut. I think you have to put it in the context of the appropriation or misappropriation of our culture by the dominant culture, whether it's jazz, whether it's hip hop. You know, white folks love what we do, right? Because of the racist narrative that has been created in this country. Many of them don't like us, but they love what we do. They love our fashion. They love our hair. They love our aesthetic. They love our hairstyle. You got more folks listening to Jay-Z than black people. Jay-Z didn't become a billionaire because black people bought his music. Jay-Z became a billionaire because white people in Minnesota bought
He had the killer crossover.
Mahmoud Abdul-Rauf.
Allen Iverson.
Shamgad.
Right.
Shamgad,
yes,
who they
sir.
said had the killer cross. Anyway, enough of that. I just want to let you know I understand a little ball too.
Exactly.
So for some, it's a fashion statement. You know, they put on the T-shirt, they hold up the sign. Then when they turn 60, they can tell their kids and their grandkids, "Look, I was down. I was cool. I was hip. I was there." They got the masks on, and you know, so for many of them, it's a fashion statement. But there again, I got friends of mine who are saying, "Wilmer, I get it. Now I get it. I saw it on television." And this time, as opposed to Rodney King, it wasn't "Don't believe your lying eyes," because we all saw the Rodney King video. We all saw that defenseless man getting brutalized by the cops. But the narratives, the controlling narrative, there's that word again. The controlling narrative then was, "Don't believe your lying eyes." Now there's been a shift because we've seen so many of these videos. And now Mr. Floyd's untimely lynching is now proving to be the piece de resistance. It's the one. And you can't deny it or debate it. So again, it is turning a lot of hearts. It is influencing a lot of minds. There is no question about that. We're gonna have to see as we move forward how committed people are.
That is the incomparable Dr. Wilmer Leon, boys and girls. We want to thank him so much for joining us today. Don't forget, you can follow him weekly on Sirius XM satellite radio.
126.
Channel 126.
Saturdays, 11 to 2 Eastern.
And what's the name of the show? Because I'm still stuck. I'm old school. I'm always going to see It's On with Leon, because every time you and I get together and have a conversation, it's on.
Well, you know, I can't. Sometimes you can't fight management. You got to go with it.
Right.
Inside the Issues with Wilmer Leon. Saturdays 11 to 2 p.m. Eastern. Channel 126. Urban View.
And plug the book. People haven't seen the book.
Okay, the book is.
See, there it is. Quality radio effort right there. That's
Politics, Another Perspective.
That's it. Check it out, y'all.
Go to WilmerLeon.com. Politics, Another Perspective. Go to WilmerLeon.com, and you can get an autographed copy of Politics, Another Perspective.
Okay, I got to get my autographed copy then. Thank you so much, Doc.
You got it, man.
Hey, that's going to do it for this edition of the gray area. Somewhere between black and white, there is that shade of gray. I want to thank Dr. Wilmer Leon from Sirius XM. Check out his book, Politics, Another Perspective. And most of all, thank you for hanging out with us. And remember, you can find me, Mark Gray, that's spelled Mark with a K, Gray with an A, at The Sports Groove, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, all over the place in cyberspace, wherever you get your social media groove on. And most importantly, stay safe if you are demonstrating. Cover yourself, wash your hands. If, like they did in D.C., they're giving out hand sanitizer every time somebody offers you one for free, you do that. And most of all, give somebody you love a hug tonight. You may not get a chance to do it tomorrow. Doc, it is always a pleasure, my friend. Thank you. That's going to do it. We are out. Peace.